Hello and welcome one and all, I am Old School Gamer 1971. Special shout out to Millie and Lloyd. Hope you're all having a great day and are staying safe. Today's subject matter is Third Hour Thoughts, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. Before we begin, if you enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up, like, and if it pleases you, check out my channel and subscribe. So without further ado, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles is an action/fantasy/RPG that was developed by Square Enix. The original release for the Nintendo GameCube in 2004. This is the remastered version for the PlayStation 4 that released in 2020. This was the first Final Fantasy game to release for a Nintendo system since the whole Final Fantasy VII debacle. It was a little after the release of the Final Fantasy Spirits Within movie. Whilst a pretty good sci-fi movie, it was a commercial failure for Square. Crystal Chronicles was a success and spawned several sequels, bearing more than a passing resemblance to Kingdom Hearts and Radiata Stories, both Square releases. Square Enix have been around since 1975 as Enix Corporation, a publisher of tabloids and advertised real estate. In 1983, Square appeared on the development scene as an upstart game developer. Many of the development tropes we see today can be attributed to Square. Merging in 2003, the once sworn enemies became Square Enix. I've enjoyed many of their games, including Dragon's Quest, Final Fantasy and Parasite Eve, as well as their rebooted Tomb Raider trilogy. For once, you play as a creative character, so you choose what they look like and their background. I chose to be a blacksmith, hoping for a boost to strength. Not sure if this game does this. Here's to hoping. Now here is something quite novel. For once, it's an unknown world. Square normally names them. This time, nothing, squat, diddly. But the game does have a pretty sound plot to make up for that nameless world. After a meteorite crashed into the planet, it shattered the crystal, and now a poisonous gas covers the whole world, miasma. So deadly it kills anyone it touches in a matter of minutes. People use fragments of the crystal to protect their settlements. Once a year they send people from their village in search of myrrh, harvested from special trees. You are the one chosen to undertake this mission and to go out and fill the vessel so your village will survive another year. So is this Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles? Or is it Last Limpet Diamond Disaster? Let's start with those who are familiar with Kingdom Hearts or Radiata Stories. You will feel right at home here. Just like the GameCube game, this is mapped very well and would argue that it makes the game maybe even a little easier to play than the aforementioned games. Some games overcomplicate the controls. This keeps it simple and is all the better for it. It will be a good introduction to those who have never played an action RPG before, especially the young ones. There are cutscenes as you travel the roads, but at some point or another, it is inevitable that you will find yourself in some fisticuffs. The system is easy for you to pick up, and then it becomes about learning the patterns of the enemies, so you can get your shots in. Whilst not overly easy, you will still feel a sense of accomplishment when the boss goes down. Either that or I am just a big kid. Unfortunately, I could only get footage of single player. This is a shame, but do know the goal remains the same: protect the crystal, single or multiplayer. This game is better in multiplayer, which is why it is a pity there is no couch co-op, online play only. Not only just that, but the multiplayer is region locked. Single player is still good, but the working together aspect is just so much better. It is also a co-op game, which is my kind of multiplayer. The characters in this game do look damn fine. They have that sort of Square Enix polish to them. There are different races and they all do look different from one another, with different outfits and genders. This gives the game a different look to many of Square Enix's other games. Considering the look of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, the Final Fantasy VIII Remaster and Final Fantasy 15 all went with a much more realistic look. I am glad that they didn't play with the formula too much here. Stylistically, this spreads onto the world, with its bright and vibrant colours. No large cities shattering through the horizon. This feels like a breath of fresh air in the current climate of gaming, where it has to be a bustling metropolis. Maybe in the past it was due to hardware restrictions. Here it just adds to the overall charm of the game. Combat does look cool, even if it is a little restrictive. They have stayed faithful to the original, so the maps are not so big, nor the arenas. Maybe this would have improved the game with a little rework here. I will point out, these are only niggles, but it does detract ever so slightly because of all the loading screens and definitely breaks up the tempo in combat.
Hail, fellow caravaner!
Good news, they have improved the original soundtrack. Bad news, they have also borrowed from other Final Fantasy soundtracks. More than once I heard samples from the original Final Fantasy VII soundtrack. It took me out of the game very slightly. Overall the music is good and didn't feel like putting on Spotify at any point. Now when it comes to the voiceover, it started off with one hell of a stutter, as almost all of the first dialogue was sounds instead of speech, and then we get outside of the gate and it all becomes speech. I just feel that the beginning is supposed to impress, and this did not. Do not get me wrong, this doesn't make the game unplayable, just that first impressions matter. It does give it a pretty big obstacle to overcome. One of the things that makes Final Fantasy Combat memorable is the battle themes. Here again, the soundtrack doesn't disappoint. When you get to the battle with the crab, it kicks in. Again, this is rather cool and certainly gets the blood pumping for those key battles. Aesthetically, this game is pleasing to the eye and ear, and once you get over those early stumbles, it is pretty much all good. I was really hoping that at this point to be saying it was a 100% positive experience. It was not. It was a mostly positive experience. Odd little things would pull me out of the game and it would take me a minute or two to get back into the swing of things. In a way, it is and isn't what I expected. I think I expected a little more. There were a few quality of life changes, but just not enough. A good example of this would be couch co-op. Would have made this game a lot better and more accessible. Having said that, the game's plot interests me enough to return to this game at some point. Games like this interest me. At the time it released, I would have had little interest. I think I am a more open to different experiences nowadays kind of gamer. It would be nice to find some people to play this through, but the game only registers as being played by the party leader. I can imagine my friend Shane getting something out of this game. If you can look beyond the graphics, beyond its flaws, and see the game beneath, there is an enjoyable game waiting there. It's not what is wrong with this game, instead it is what is missing. I award Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles a solid 6.9 out of 10. So Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, this most definitely is. So let's see if this bad boy is a peeler crab. It's just what I do. And it's done. If you found this video interesting or have any suggestions, please comment down below, as it will put a big old smile on this old face. Let's get the conversation started. I will answer you all. I post new content every week. Have a great day one and all, and thank you for your support. This has been Old School Gamer 1971, signing off.